Please get out your smartphones, your tablets, because we're going to start by asking you some questions again. It worked so well this morning. As a reminder, the website is slido.com, and you need to put in the hashtag EPALE Conf 18. Okay, are you all logged in? Yes, right. Let's have the first question up on the screen, please. So, the European Agenda for Adult Learning, has it been useful for you? Has it helped you to influence or shape the national agenda to support what you want to do? And you can vote on a range of scales. Okay. So somewhat useful and useful. This is a good message because somewhere around 85 to 90% of the responses show that the European agenda was useful or somewhat useful to the work that you're doing. Okay. So if that's the case, our next question is, do we need a new one to cover the post-2020 period? The response is logical given what you've just said about the previous section, but I just wanted to get all of your buy-in. Because if it's the case that you recognize the added value of a document, then we rely on you to help us build the content and the elements of what should be in it for the next period. So 99% said we need it. Good. Okay. When we hear the results of the workshop, we'll explore a little bit about the gap that often exists between a policy document and action on the ground. But the third question I wanted to ask you is, how could the EU do better or be smarter in the way it supports your activities at national level? And we've left this free text, so you can suggest anything that makes sense for you. And we'll be providing the answers in a word cloud like we did this morning to see what it is that the EU can provide of value to help you. And this is based on the fact that the message is very clear. All countries are very different in their culture and their structures of education. They all have very different starting points, that no one document can cover everything. So what is it that the EU could do that would be better, more effective, or smarter in supporting your activities? Okay. So we're starting to see some messages come through, and these will all, again, as we will capture these as we've captured the results of all the workshops, and they will be part of our report afterwards. It's coming through, I think, faster than our word cloud can cope with it, but this is extremely helpful. Okay, so I'll allow that information to come through, and while I'm doing that, let's get a sense of what you talked about in your workshops before lunch. Because after our initial opening session, we then broke out into 6 different workshops, and I should at this point pass a sincere apology to you that we didn't make it as effective and efficient as we would have liked to inform you which workshop you were in. That created a delay, and I apologize for that. We had a technical mishap with printing. It will be sorted out for tomorrow, so we won't have that problem again. So, in the light of making the conference more interesting, instead of having a formal report back from each workshop, I'm going to have an interactive conversation with some of the facilitators of your workshops. None of the rich content of your workshops will be lost, because their task when they leave this conference is to go away and write down the content. Some of them have photographed flip charts, or I know at least one workshop you had a group editing session. We won't lose any of it. All I want to do now is give you a little bit of the flavor of the conversations that happened in the workshops where you were not present, and to get a sense where we can take the temperature of everyone across the conference. So, what was discussed? We asked you, was another document, EU-level document, needed? And was the existing document useful? And about 85% said the current EU agenda was useful, and 99% said a new one is useful. So let's understand what was happening. Before the break, we gave you a proposed vision. And then we asked in the workshops, is that the right vision? And the message came through, it's a good starting point. But it reflects very much a top-down view, and a view from the EU down to what things look like on the ground. But the groups discussed that we need to have a much more learner-based or individual starting point. And I'd like to now invite someone from Workshop 1 to add into that. Who is from Workshop 1 who can add? Yes.
Thank you. Is this on?
Yes.
Thank you, Tamsin. Yes, the workshop 1 was really geared towards reflection of an ideal state of adult learning in the EU, and the realities across the continent are such that it was felt that a top-down vision is not really called for. What we need is a learner-centered vision, and in some countries the situation with adult learning is such that the way we framed the ideal, that everything, funding is abundant and the learning provision is abundant, it doesn't make sense to frame it in such ideal terms. We need to start bottom down and with perhaps not less ambition but more realism.
Okay, thank you. And coming out of the conversations, there was a message. We need to have a much better definition of both adult learning and adult learners, so that more people can identify themselves in that pattern and identify those processes as relevant and interesting to that. And we discussed a little bit about what does it mean to be an adult learner. What we're really looking to do is encourage people to learn, to encourage their curiosity and learn how to live with change, resilience with the big changes that are coming in society. There is a wide range of provision of different types of adult learning, but sometimes we have a mismatch. There's a huge need for it, but when there are some courses, the uptake is not very strong. So let me have someone from Workshop 2 who can speak to that.
So in Workshop 2, we were saying that in some countries, there can be courses with places open, but not necessarily people who are looking for those courses. And we thought there was a few different reasons for that stigma came into it, that there's not necessarily the kind of perception that we want of adult learning, but also the understanding of adult learning that sometimes people don't recognize that they're learning, particularly if it's in a non-formal way. So if we could start to have a more positive image of learning and start to see when we're learning in non-formal ways, that could start to encourage us to maybe learn in other ways as well, and relook at the types of provisions we have, that it might not necessarily be about more provisions, but different types of provisions, and to focus on the quality of provisions, not necessarily getting more people in to learn, but making sure that we're giving the best quality to the people who do want to learn.
Okay, thank you. And on this issue that there are diverse sets of needs and diverse sets of people who need access to it, one of the workshops asked the question, can we meet all of the needs of different subgroups of the population? And one of the first questions is it appropriate? Is it realistic to divide people into subgroups because people might fit across several of them? But that workshop said, yes, but there are big challenges. Can I have someone from Workshop 3 who could speak to that?
Yes, I think in our group we found that we both agreed and disagreed that you could meet the needs of all the target groups. And I think in conclusion we agreed that it can definitely be done, but it will be a challenge. And one of the ways discussed was a need to have increased cooperation and communication between all relevant parties, so from the community, NGOs, through to the European Commission and beyond, to make sure that there is ongoing communication and we're aware of the different needs of the groups and actively involve the learners in the process, and to make use of existing tools and mechanisms that are available in order to facilitate this as well. And also to recognise that there are different needs at a local, national and European level, but that it can definitely be achieved, but there's some work to be done.
Okay, thank you. What came out again also across the workshops is the value of sharing ideas and good practice. If you have different subgroups of population and different providers trying to address different challenges, there is still material and ideas that could be shared that could increase the impact of what you're doing in different areas. What came out again was the need for much greater connection between the vision, whether it's at EU and national level, and what's actually happening at local level. And that link needs to be stronger. Could I have someone from Workshop 4 who could add to that?
Thank you. What came up as one of the conclusions was actually that even though we are aware at national level of the policies which are set on European level, sometimes it is not quite clear how it can be applied on a national level and in national context. So the proposition that was made throughout the groups was that more focus should be put on individual stories being showcased as good examples, as well as providing more space for exchanging good practices and making good practices more visible as an illustration of what could be achieved with these policies.
Okay, thank you. And there's also the important aspect that where there is EU funding, that there needs to be greater consistency and alignment and correlation with what's happening at national and local level. Could I have someone from Working Group 6 who could speak to that?
5.
Sorry, 5.
Oh, 5, 6, 5, right? Yeah.
No, 6.
Yeah.
I don't mind, whoever.
Yeah.
Either working group could speak to it, yes.
You could probably say something about that as well.
Stand up, both of you could both speak.
Yeah.
Let's not separate the working groups out, yes.
No, we actually found sort of in our discussions that we had quite a lot of themes in common that stretched across a lot of the workshops. So it's just not my workshop that found that connection between the local level, the national and the EU level was could be strengthened. And one of the ways to do that was to involve everyone in policy making in some way, shape or form, but also to get those two sides of adult learning talking to each other. So get the Ministries of Employment and the Ministries of Education together on one table and start talking to get a broader and more holistic view and engagement with adult learning and adult education. Do you want to add something?
Well, we discussed in our group a little bit more the link between visions and EU instruments or EU support. And it was mentioned a few times in our group that it's nice to have something on paper, but it still remains paper. And there's not always that much life into it. And that life needs to be brought in cooperation, and that life needs to be institutionalized and needs to be kind of integrated in what people do on the ground. And here comes in as well EU support and EU funding through all its means, through Erasmus, through ESF, but also EPALE as a kind of a platform for sharing those opportunities. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Something that came up on the board very quickly was the word flexibility. And when we were discussing the different results of the working groups, this issue of flexibility came up, that it isn't just about the numbers, but also the quality and the outcomes. Would somebody like to speak to that? That I think was I've got working group 5 down for that topic.
Yes. Hello. So in terms of flexibility, that topic was brought up a lot in that sort of flexibility in terms of reaching target groups or groups of people that haven't been engaged in learning and wouldn't usually engage in learning because they think this isn't for me. I can't cope with this length of program or with this type of program. The other term of flexibility was to adjust funding in a way, for instance, if a member of staff goes away on a mobility, how is the organization going to replace that educator? So many organizations wished for flexibility in terms of adjusting funding for that particular purpose.
Okay, thank you. Also, the issue came out that many programs are very specifically targeted to certain groups and certain parts of the population, which then deters other people who don't identify themselves as that, and there needs to be a more inclusive and open way of thinking about adult learning. And there was one, I think it was from the Netherlands, who have changed lifelong learning to, is it lifelong development as a process, because we talked about the fact that lifelong learning as itself is sometimes a barrier. That language needs to be updated in people's understanding and awareness so that it is more inclusive to what it might include, like learning how to age better, civic responsibility, how to participate, how to take care of your own well-being, rather than subjects that people might think of as classic learning. Let's now think what should be the EU role, and one of the messages said it isn't really that the EU needs to do more, but do it differently, engage differently, listen differently, and collaborate differently. Would any of the workshops like to respond on that issue?
So in work group 2, that kind of came up for us, that it's not that we want the Commission to take on lots of new pieces around adult learning, that there was a fear that it could, I suppose, overstretch. So it wasn't about, as you said, doing more, but just doing it differently. I think that's how it came in for us.
We discussed a bit how to communicate it and how to kind of bring it closer to the people. And there was a remark to make kind of, I think the EU is doing that already, but make it even more powerful to have kind of longer and shorter versions of the same topic and illustrate things with indeed learner biographies and showcase better to make it appealing to the readers. And maybe even change language from a technical language which might be politically correct to a language that really appeals to normal people, let's say.
Thank you. And we had one group who came up with a innovative idea, a credit card mechanism. Who's going to speak to the credit card? Make room in your wallets for your new credit card.
For the new credit card for education, yes. Okay, I will try to transfer this concept, but if at any time one of our inventors wishes to add in, feel free to raise your hand. It's an unconditional European credit card, which could serve for so to speak, book any educational course or offer that you might be interested in across Europe. So it would be used specifically for education. Since our group was talking about guidance and validation, it would also be used for the services of guidance for adult learners. So this is the rough concept.
So it would be a credit card that people could use to choose different learning options with a budget supplied by...
That's the thing that we did not discuss in detail. We didn't have much time, but again, I invite if our members of that specific group that were there thought about it, you can share. If not, we will elaborate and then maybe let you know later on.
Okay, so the challenges and the details, but we all already have in our wallets, the EHIC card, the European Health Insurance card. So maybe in the medium to long term, we could think about some unifying card that would allow us to access adult learning in different countries in different ways that is as ubiquitous and well known and understood as the EHIC card.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And I think one of the things that struck me in listening to the feedback from the 6 groups that we just did briefly was the message that each country is different and the challenges are different, but the big issue that we're all trying to solve is, in society, how do we live together? And how do we live together well at all ages of life? How does society cooperate towards a better future? And I think that's probably a good point to wrap up about the contribution of adult learning, is it speaks to that. And all of our countries are committed to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are about making a better society and a better planet. And adult learning helps address some of those issues. Is there any final message that any of my facilitators want to add to that? Or have we captured just a tiny piece of the flavor of your conversations? You comfortable with that? Okay, then can we give yourselves a round of applause for the hard work you gave in those workshops?